Thank you, Jared, very much. I'm honored to be with you here today. I was told don't touch the microphone or it might go crazy, so I'm going to do my best. Can you all hear me all the way in the back? Okay, thumbs up. Thank you. I'm glad to be here today. I've always wanted to come see New St. Andrews. I met your president, Pastor Wilson, through a mutual friend who is Jewish, and the conversation went like this: Doc, you gotta meet this guy named Pastor Wilson. And I didn't know who he was talking about, but he put us on the phone, and I said, wait a second, you're Doug Wilson from Moscow, Idaho. He said, yes. I said, I read your books. In fact, I think I probably gushed over it. I read his book, American Milk and Honey, and I thought, dang, that guy can write. That was my main reaction. Have you ever read something and you thought, I wish I would have thought to say it that way? That was my reaction when I read that book. But I had also written on the topic of Israel. It's not our main focus at Summit Ministries, but we are interested at Summit Ministries in equipping and supporting a rising generation to embrace God's truth and champion a biblical worldview. So we typically take on whatever the most difficult topics are in the culture, the ones that are hardest to understand from a biblical worldview, and focus on those. So that's what I wanted to talk a little bit about this afternoon. I'm watching the clock here because if I have enough time at the end, we may have time for Q&A. So be thinking of what you might want to ask. This presentation really came out of 9 hours of Q&A that I had with supporters of Israel and skeptics, asking the question, why should I as a Christian support Israel? Those 9 hours, they were pretty difficult. They were so difficult that when somebody in the media who was doing a hostile interview asked me, he said, man, I'm really sorry that my questions are so hard. I said, listen, I just spent 9 hours with Gen Zers talking about this topic. Trust me, your questions are not that hard. Because like all topics that we have to deal with as believers, this one leaves as many questions unanswered and may even open up more questions than it answers. But to understand the current Israel situation, the way people back home are debating it and the way it will probably be talked about this summer, I think in order to understand it, we have to go all the way back into the Old Testament to a guy named Samson. You may remember that he went to see a prostitute and somehow discovered that the men of the city were planning to attack him in the morning, take him captive and kill him because he was Israel's greatest champion. So he woke up at midnight, went to the gates of the city and tore the gates and the gate posts off. Anybody remember what the name of that city was? It was called a city called Gaza. The gates of Gaza then were carried by Samson to a hill overlooking Hebron. There are a couple of significant facts about that. One is that Hebron is 36 miles away from Gaza. So he was carrying 4,000 pounds of doors all the way there. Second of all, Hebron is where Abraham is buried. So you have this grunting, physically enacted prophecy where this degenerate patriarch takes the defenses of Israel's enemy and deposits them at the tomb of the redeemed patriarch, Abraham, the one whose willingness to sacrifice his own son presaged the coming Messiah. All of that with Samson in Gaza. Fast forward to 1956. Roy Rotberg was a peace activist who lived in a small kibbutz called Nahal Oz. He saw some Arabs off in the distance illegally picking some of the kibbutz's crops. He rode his horse over to shoo them away. It was a trap. Infiltrators from Gaza shot and killed Roy and then horribly mutilated his body. And one of those strange things that happens in history, Moshe Dayan, who was the chief of staff of the Israeli Defense Force, happened to be in the kibbutz at that time. And so he gave the eulogy for Roy. It's only 238 words long, but it is as famous in Israel as Lincoln's Gettysburg Address is in the United States. He said this: Roy, the light in his heart blinded his eyes, and he saw not the flash of the blade. The longing for peace deafened his ears, and he heard not the sound of the coiled murderers. The gates of Gaza were too heavy for him, for his shoulders, and they crushed him. Fast forward to October 7th, 2023. Infiltrators from Gaza, numbering 3,000, armed with everything from machine guns to rocket-propelled grenades to Cornet missiles that can melt through 2 feet of steel to attack tanks, infiltrated across the border into Israel. They attacked the people who were living there. The people who, in Israel who wanted peace the most are the ones who lived up against the border with Gaza. By attacking the most peace-focused, accommodating Israelis, Hamas signaled that it would never, as long as it could draw breath, allow any Israeli to be safe. One of the places, if you go to visit there, you'll see is the site of the Nova Festival. It was an all-night dance party. 364 people, 1 out of every 10 attendees, was slaughtered by Hamas on that day. The director of the Nova Festival shared her belief with me that the survivors, in fact, are not in a good place. It turned out to be true. Within a matter of months, 50 more of them had died by suicide. They couldn't live with what they witnessed and the guilt of having survived. What is it that they witnessed? I'm sorry to bring this to you on a Friday afternoon, but I feel like I need to tell you the whole truth. Dr. Kanta Ahmed is a Muslim doctor, and she said this after examining the bodies of the victims. Hamas arrived with orders to mass rape. Phrase books belonging to Hamas found in the Ra'im area listed phonetic Hebrew commands in Arabic. Take your clothes off, spread your legs, get down. Terabytes of their own video data confirm that Hamas raped, amputated breasts, mutilated women's genitals, and committed systematic sexual crimes on both the living and the dead. Now, Dr. Ahmad was not paid by Israel to say this. She does not agree with Judaism's approach to life. And yet, what she said was confirmed to me by the IDF official who was in charge of preparing women's bodies for burial. You would think, after experiencing an attack like this, or after watching this in the news, that American young adults would be disposed to feel kindly toward their Jewish neighbors. They might go find their Jewish neighbors and say, I just want you to know, if anyone comes for you, they're going to have to come through me, because you want to stand up for those who are vulnerable. But that is exactly the opposite of what happened in the United States. A Harvard CAPS poll revealed in December of 2023, 2 months after the attacks, it revealed that 60% of Gen Zers said that the attacks by Hamas were justified because of Palestinian grievances. Not only were they saying, I don't think that was a good idea, or they weren't saying it's not a good idea, or they weren't saying, I'm kind of in favor of Palestinians, but this was a little much. No, they said those attacks were justified by Palestinian grievances. I was upset by this. I wrote an opinion editorial piece for Daily Wire called Congratulations, America, You've Raised a Generation of Terrorist Sympathizers. That got a reaction. I will tell you that. It was a good reaction from some people. My staff, God bless them, fielded a lot of what we call nastygrams that come in when people who are upset. But that opinion editorial piece for Daily Wire led to an opportunity to join a small group of leaders to actually go to the war zone and examine what had happened for myself. And that led to my wanting to communicate 3 things to as many believers as I possibly can in the time that I have. So we arrived in Israel. It was very difficult to get there in a time of war. Everybody was asking, why are you coming here? Don't you know we're at war? We arrived in the city of Tel Aviv, drove to Jerusalem. It was eerily quiet. Jerusalem is never quiet. There are 2 million pilgrims who visit Jerusalem every single year, but it was quiet at this time. I spent a lot of time with people, Israelis, Palestinians, Israeli Jews, Israeli Arabs, people who were peace activists, people who were in the military. Among them, Rachel Goldberg, her son Hirsch was one of those taken captive on October 7th. Later, on the day he was supposed to be released, he was killed by his Hamas captors. I also spent some time with Rabbi Doron Perez. His son Daniel was thought to be a captive. And as we prayed together and I had some time to visit with him, just a couple of weeks later, we learned that his son, in fact, had been killed on October 7th as a member of the military. I spent some time with an Arab Israeli citizen, a Muslim by birth, but a non-practicing Muslim. His name is Khalid Abu Toma. He told me, I have felt safer interviewing the PLO and Hamas leadership than giving lectures at U.S. colleges. It's an extraordinary thing for a journalist to say. There is more support for Hamas on U.S. campuses than among Arabs in Israel. Not even the Palestinian territory of the West Bank hosts parades like those seen on U.S. campuses. What is going on? Well, before I had a chance to really process all of my thoughts, we were on a bus with our security guard heading toward Gaza. And it's really obvious when you're arriving there, the roads become rough because they're chewed up by tank treads. You could see off in the distance smoke arising from terrorist hideouts that are being targeted by the IDF. I could see that smoke on my right. I could hear the artillery going off on my left and realize we're literally right in the middle of a battle, 1 hour and a half drive from Jerusalem, about the same distance as from here to Spokane. We arrived at a kibbutz, Kfar Aza. You can see Gaza off in the distance from the wall of the kibbutz. It was so close, we were told we were within sniper range. We were issued body armor and Kevlar helmets for touring around the city. And it's just a small community. About 500 people live there. It'd be about the size of the community that surrounds New St. Andrews College. We went a walk through the streets and I asked, what are these markings on the doors? They said when a house is cleared after an attack, the soldiers put markings so that everyone else knows that house has been cleared and what happened. I asked, what is the circle with the dot inside? And they said, that means that a body was found inside that house. There was a circle with a dot in it by nearly every single home in the community. Seeing that red by the doors, I couldn't help but be reminded of the Passover, when the Jews were told, put the blood of a lamb on the doorposts and the angel of death will pass over. The angel of death did not pass over Kfar Aza. About 10% of the people, 65 people in the community, were killed on that day, including the community's doctor and his wife. Their 2 10-month-old babies were left screaming for 14 hours. Anyone who came to try to rescue them was gunned down. From there, we moved on to the city of Sderot. I don't know how to describe how pretty of a little town it is. If you've ever been to a place like Camarillo, California, someplace in California that hasn't burned down yet, that's actually really nice. That's what it looks like. And we went to the new police headquarters. The old police headquarters had been bombed. 20 police officers had been killed. Turns out their janitor, who came from Gaza, they had offered him a job so that he could make a good living for himself. He had drawn out a map of the facility and given it to Hamas to make sure that as many officers as possible were killed. But as we went into the new police headquarters, we watched video footage. I'm not going to show you any of it. It's some of the most horrifying material that I've ever seen in my life. Keep in mind that Hamas actually recorded this because they intended to release it to the world. They wanted the world to be so shocked that it eventually became numb to acts of violence against Jews. This picture is of one of the videos. A family was fleeing town in their car. The car was shot dead in the street by some terrorists. The father got out and ran down the street with his daughter, bending over to try to protect her from the gunfire. He was gunned down. As he fell, the daughter jumped back up and ran back down the street with her hands covering her ears, trying to flee the sound and find her mother. Question really arose when I got back to the United States. Well, what does this have to do with us? What does this have to do with Christians? Should Christians support Israel? Was the big question. And my answer, as you can probably tell already, is going to be yes. I believe that does not mean that we support every action that Israel takes. I support the United States of America. I am a proud American, but I do not support everything the American government does. Why would I feel that I have to support everything that a foreign government does? But I think there are three reasons why I should care and why you should care what is happening in Israel. Yes, there are 193 nations in the world. Yes, a lot of them have issues, but this is of particular concern for three reasons that I will explain now. First, I believe Christians should support Israel because Christians should care about the truth. The amount of propaganda that is being spread in the United States, both on the left and the right, is shocking to me as someone who's now working with young adults for the third generation, my own generation, Gen X, the millennial generation, and now Gen Z. Even I did not think it could get this bad. One of the things about this Hamas group that was governing Gaza, the group that did the attack on Israel on October 7th, is that they write out everything that they think. In fact, after the attacks, they put out a 16-page color brochure called Our Narrative, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. I thought that was a little bit odd. I mean, imagine going to court and the judge asked, tell the truth about what happened. And you said, well, my narrative is, the judge would say, I don't want to hear your narrative. I want to know the truth. But you see, Hamas is very, very good at propaganda. They said this: the Palestinian resistance was fully disciplined and committed to the Islamic values during the operation, and the Palestinian fighters were keen to avoid harming civilians. All of this is a blatant lie. Everyone knows that it's a blatant lie. Hamas members themselves know that it is a lie, but they believe that it is okay for them to lie if the end result is that Israel is destroyed in its ability to defend itself and every Jew in the world is killed. We know this because people like Khalid Mashal, he's a Hamas leader, he's the external leader. Khalid Mashal has gained a net worth of $5 billion by skimming international aid designated for destitute Gazans. In fact, all 600 Hamas leaders are all millionaires and billionaires because of the aid that came in that they took and turned around and sold at highly inflated prices to the people in Gaza. But Khalid Mashal said this in an interview. And by the way, he said this in Arabic. One of the things, when you're looking at an issue like this, you realize most people in the world think if you have something important to say, you'll say it in English. But he does not speak this in English, he speaks it in Arabic. If you can find translators, you'll be stunned to discover what's actually being said. He said this in the interview: the Palestinian nation is just like any other nation. No nation is liberated without sacrifices. And he went on to talk about the Soviet Union, about Vietnam, about Angola, all of the places in the world that had had a communist revolution. Now, why would he draw on that as inspiration? Because there is an element to Hamas and to the radical Islamic community that is very much of a Marxist persuasion. It's why you will find in the United States groups like the Socialist Equality Party being the ones that carry on the Palestinian so-called resistance in the United States. They had a statement calling for protest in Washington, D.C. on the day that Benjamin Netanyahu was there to speak to Congress. They said this: the central task is the fusing of the fight against war with the growing social movement of the working class and the struggle for the socialist transformation of society. The essential cause of war lies in the capitalist nation-state system. What they want is the overthrow of the United States ultimately, and they believe they can carry that out by supporting Palestine. I happened to be in Washington, D.C. that day because Benjamin Netanyahu spoke in the afternoon. That morning, my book, Should Christians Support Israel, was personally handed to every single member of Congress. I asked the person who was handing them out, how did that go with AOC? He said, I had to resist the impulse to slap her over the head with it. But I went down to Union Station right across the street from Union Station where you come out is the Columbus statue. It's an American landmark. It had been defaced, saying Hamas is coming, free Gaza, all Zionists are bastards. So why would people protest like this? Why would they do this? Why would they stand so firmly against Jews and for Hamas? Well, there are a number of reasons, and this is why I say I'm concerned about the truth. In the past, people believe that truth is something you would actually seek. You believe that here at your college. But most people in the world do not believe that you seek the truth. They believe that you speak your truth. You are the center of reality. And people very quickly figure out, if I am the center of reality, then every single thing that goes wrong in the world is my fault, right? That's how they begin to think. A study of sixth graders recently found that 53% of them say they believe the world is going to end during their lifetime because of climate change. There are adults in this country who intentionally, for power and profit, scare children to death to think that they have no future. So what do you do? If you don't have any belief in God, then you can't confess to a priest or talk to a pastor, so what do? Well, how do you atone? Well, you atone by appearing publicly to be a virtuous person. You posted on social media that your presence at events was noted so that the people you think are watching will attach virtue to you. We call it virtue signaling. How do we know that's happening? Well, take any picture of the protest and look at what people are doing. Taking a selfie, 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 taking a selfie. Everyone there are people holding up these signs, which are pre-printed by, and you can look up the organization sponsoring this. It's not rocket science to figure it out. But most of the people are there because they want to be seen as virtuous by being there. Who plans these? I don't know if you're aware of this, but these are paid events. There's actually a PR firm in Los Angeles called Crowds on Demand. It says Crowds on Demand is your home for impactful advocacy campaigns, demonstrations, PR stunts, crowds for hire, and corporate events, services available nationwide. These are not spontaneous protests. They are bought and paid for by people who want to get attention for their particular cause. The head of Crowds on Demand, Adam Swart, pays activists to lead these protests. If you ever see a protest, you'll notice the person with the bullhorn might have lots of stickers, like an LGBTQ sticker, a BLM sticker, and all those things. It's because they've been paid, literally been paid $46 an hour to take their bullhorn, get people wound up, and lead the protests. He said that he received hundreds of requests to lead anti-Israel protests, including dozens of lucrative ones. He says that he did not lead these, but we know that other organizations have led them. In fact, groups behind the Israel-bashing protests, backing Hamas attacks, were funded to the tune of $15 million from George Soros. So Christians should, I believe, care about the truth. And we should care about it in a way that tries to bring the truth to other people. The Apostle Paul said in 2 Timothy 2:26, God may perhaps grant them repentance, leading to a knowledge of the truth, and that they may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will. One of the ways that we tried to bring truth was through surveys. We did national surveys with our survey partner, run by a guy named Scott Rasmussen, one of the most respected pollsters in the United States of America. So we asked questions, and then depending on the answer, it led to another question. For example, we asked this question: what about the fact that Israel has greater wealth and military power? Does that make its military campaign against Hamas unjust? 47% of 18 to 24-year-olds said yes, that makes Israel's campaign unjust. For those who said yes to that question, we asked this question: Hamas leaders have become wealthy by skimming international aid designated for Palestinian citizens. Do such actions on the part of Hamas leaders make their cause unjust? 57% said yes. They went from saying, I think Israel is the unjust party, to saying, I think Hamas is the unjust party. And by the way, 23% now said they were uncertain. If somebody believes something that's evil, it's better that they're uncertain than that they are certain. Do you follow me? We need to be able to communicate the truth. And sometimes, as this demonstrates, it's simply bringing up a fact that people haven't considered. And you would be amazed, because I've been to these protests and talked to people. One poll found that then they were chanting, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. 50% of the people in the crowd could not name either the river or the sea they were chanting about. Second, Christians should care about the Jewish people. I don't know if you've seen, try to locate this for you and where things happen. This is Israel right here. It's about the size of New Jersey. It is surrounded by Syria, There are people in Syria, a group called Hezbollah that is directly funded by Iran, whose stated goal is the destruction of the state of Israel. They're surrounded by Syria. There are elements, mostly Afghan soldiers, also paid by Iran. In Syria, it's Lebanon, there's the first one, then Syria. And then you see the West Bank, what's called the West Bank. It's a settlement on the West Bank of the Jordan River that is mostly Palestinian. They shoot rockets from there. To date, my count is more than 30,000 rocket attacks. I'm not misstating that. 30,000 rocket attacks of Israel. You see Jordan, it's a larger country, more sparsely populated, but a very unstable country, populated by people, 95% of whom say they hate Jews. You've got Egypt. 95% of people in Egypt say they hate Jews, even though there is a relationship between Israel and Egypt, a peace agreement at the present time. And then you also see the tip of the Red Sea there, where 1,000 or so miles to the south, Houthi terrorists from Yemen have attacked 80 vessels with missiles and drones. Now, there are somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 of these Houthi rebels. And they have essentially shut down global commerce by shutting down the Red Sea. And then, worst of all, it's about a full day's drive, if you could drive from there, is Iran. Iran is so big, Israel is 1% of the landmass of the size of Iran. Iran is one of the largest oil exporters in the world, even though their oil is embargoed. They put it on ships, they move the ships out into the channel, they turn off the transponder, they take the oil and put it into a different ship, and it is sold. Approximately, I think 70% of the oil used by China, of the Iranian oil, 70% of it is purchased by China. So you can see that this is a huge global mess. What does Hamas say about all of this? Well, Hamas, once again, they're not ashamed of what they say. They want every Jew in the world to die, and they come right out and say it. In their 2017 charter, they said they want to eliminate Israel. Not one stone of Jerusalem can be surrendered or relinquished. They assert the right to commit acts of violence. Resistance and jihad for the liberation of Palestine will remain a legitimate right, a duty, and an honor for all the sons and daughters of our people and our ummah, the global community of Muslims. Most Muslims in the world have not embraced Hamas. In fact, they've been banned from the United Arab Emirates, from Egypt, and from many other countries. They were initially invited to Syria. They sparked a civil war there. 1.5 million people died, so Hamas fighters are not welcome there anymore. No Muslim nation in the world wants them, and yet they're funded to a large extent by Iran and by the nation of Qatar. How does this affect you and me? By the way, because people ask me, well, what about genocide? It's important to understand that of all of the people who have been killed in Gaza, half of them have been identified as Hamas fighters. So they were in a war trying to kill their enemy, and they were killed. That is not genocide. What about the civilians who died? Civilians always die in a time of war. It's a sad fact of life. Of the 3,000 years of human history that Will Durant chronicled, only 238 years have been completely at peace. Usually in an urban warfare situation, 9 civilians are killed for every 1 fighter killed. In this situation, it was 1 civilian killed for every fighter who was killed, which demonstrates to me that Israel is operating this campaign in a very restrained fashion. I'm not the only one who believes that. America's leading expert on fighting just war says Israel's done more to make this a just war than any nation in any war in history, including the United States in Afghanistan and Iraq. But in the United States of America, anti-Semitic hate crimes have reached a record high. You can actually see the difference. Starting in 2024, the numbers quadrupled. There is an attack against a Jew in the United States of America every single hour of every day. In the last year, Jewish students have reported enduring anti-Semitic slurs in class, being expelled from campus clubs, and having swastikas carved into the walls of their rooms. At the Ivy League Cornell University, posts to the university's Greek Rank Forum threatened to rape female Jewish students and behead Jewish babies in front of their parents. And another called for students to follow Jewish students home from campus and slit their throats. you're wondering why the Trump administration is cracking down so hard on these universities, because this is the kind of behavior that is taking place there. It's interesting, in the time that I've spent with IDF fighters, they always end up seeming so measured. They're so, I guess, circumspect. One soldier told me, look, he said, people say that the people who did this to us are animals. They're not animals. They're people just like us, but they are people who went to a dark place. This was not a man who has any religious belief that I'm aware of, but he understands something. Every great Holocaust begins with words. Proverbs 18:21 says, the tongue is the power of life and death, and those who would first kill, they first dehumanize their victims. They attempt to destroy the image-bearing capacity of those individuals. When I was growing up, and I was your age, I saw it in Rwanda, where the Tutsis were called cockroaches by the Hutu, and then they were mercilessly slaughtered. People who sat in church singing hymns side by side, swung swords, machetes at their neighbors and slit their throats the very next week. Started with words. And then finally, the third reason, so Christians should care about the truth. Christians the second one is Christians should care about Christians should care about the truth. Christians should care about God's plan for the world. Now, you know the theology probably better than I do. The Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, when Pastor Wilson talked about this in his book, American Milk and Honey, he said there's a big conflict about how the church should view Israel. Some people say that the church has replaced Israel as God's people. I thought he made a very good point in the book that he said this, it is not the church that is the sole recipient. What we're seeing is the universalization of God's plan for Israel now applied to all people of the earth. And you see that in places like Galatians chapter 3. Know then that it is those of faith who are the sons of Abraham, and the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham. That could lead to a really good discussion in theology class, couldn't it? What Abraham received was the preaching of the gospel preached to him by God, saying, in you shall all the nations be blessed. So then those who are of faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith. It's interesting when you look at Israel today, you realize politically and economically, entirely aside from the Christian case, Israel is essential to the world. I don't know if you're aware of this, but 25% of the innovations technologically and medically that are common in the United States today began in Israel. Research into all different kinds of disease prevention, things like graphene, which is one of the most significant technological inventions of your day, all were funded by Israeli venture capitalist groups. It is so significant that Dr. George Gilder, the economist, has said that if Israel falls, European capitalism will fall, and then capitalism in the United States will fall. The economic case is profound. But I'll tell you one thing that I've always found a little weird. When you look at the rankings of happiness in the world, there's actually a global happiness survey, believe it or not. People in 143 countries can tell you how happy they are. Young people in Israel are the second happiest group of people in the world. You think, how's that possible? They're fighting a war on 7 different fronts. They all have to serve in the military. They have a very good chance that they might die prematurely because of their service in the military. And they're surrounded by people who hate them. What is there to be so happy about? And it's fascinating because if you look, the United States young people are 62nd on the list. There's something going on in Israel that we need to pay attention to, something that allows young people there to be resilient and therefore happy. Because in the United States of America, we have this belief that you're going to be happiest when you are free from all difficulties. And that simply is not the case. I'll close with this. One of the individuals I spent time with in Israel on the trip to the war zone was Emir Tabom. He happened to live in the Nahal Oz kibbutz, where Roy Rotberg was killed, the example I gave you at the very beginning. Emir and I don't see eye to eye politically. One thing you need to understand about Israel, it's a very vibrant democracy. In the United States of America, we have 2 dominant political parties with 10 also-rans. In Israel, for 9 million people, there are 55 political parties, and 15 of them hold seats in the Knesset. In fact, the majority party, the party of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Likud party, only holds 32 seats out of 120. It's impossible for them to govern without a coalition of other parties that might be like-minded. So Amir, even though he's my friend, is on the opposite side of virtually every issue. Amir is a journalist who writes for a newspaper called Haaretz. Haaretz is so far left, it makes the Washington Post look right-wing. And if you ever read an issue of it, you would understand what I'm talking about. I asked him, however, are you going back to Nahal Oz with your family? And he said, having just experienced 14 hours in their safe room with people trying to throw grenades in and shoot them, he said, we're going back. And I asked him, why would you go back? He said, we show by being there that we want peace and that we will not be intimidated. And I asked him, but you don't carry a weapon, do you? He said, I do not. And I asked him, well, then how do you fight? And he said this, we fight through our presence. We fight through our presence. There's something to be said for faithfully showing up. Something to be said for sacrificing today's comforts for tomorrow's benefit. It takes vision to be able to do that, and our vision is clearer when we stand on the platform of core biblical truth, which is why it's so essential that you're studying the way you do at New St. Andrews. It's hard, but when we seek peace and pursue it, in the hope that what is right and just and true will win, then our lives become part of a legacy that extends hand to hand all the way back to the earliest believers who were genuinely persecuted for their faith and found themselves to be happy because they were doing the will of God. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. We do have a few minutes left for questions. We have enough time for questions, but not really for answers. So, but if you've got a question, can you maybe stand up or raise your hand so I can see you, and then speak loudly enough so that I can hear you?
What effect should a Christian's eschatological views have on whether he supports Israel?
The most likely supporters of Israel today in the United States and the Christian community are people of a premillennial persuasion. I came up Presbyterian. I've always been more drawn to an amillennial view. I'm challenged in my amillennialism by the fact that Israel exists, because as far as I can tell, it exists. I mean, it's the only Jewish nation in the world, but its basic law is based on the book of Deuteronomy. It is, I believe, the third sort of incarnation of Israel in history. So when I look back at some of the people who were heroes of mine, people who also had their own issues with anti-Semitism like Martin Luther, and then also people like John Calvin, I find that they spoke of Israel as if it were a spiritual metaphor, which made sense because at the time they were writing, no physical Israel existed. Now a physical Israel exists. And I don't think people in the world of theology have grappled with what that actually means. The covenant of God that you see beginning with the Abrahamic covenant is always very physical. Every single reference to it in the Old Testament is the covenant with the people in the land, with the people in the land. So I think that people of various eschatological views can come together in the support of Israel. If you say, but I'm not sure that my Christian convictions can support it, then you can understand geopolitically as well as theopolitically why it's worthy of our support. So without having to go into any further detail. Yes.
So one thing we emphasize a lot at Christian Andrews is not being emotionally manipulated by imagery and soft stories. So great that Hamas being evil and terrible based on all those things. If the children of Abraham are those by faith who established, then regardless of eschatology, what obligation do Christians have to defend a pagan nation that is an open rebellion towards their Messiah?
So I assume that you are, I don't know if you all could hear the question. I'm assuming that you're referring to the writings of the Apostle Paul. I did deal with that in the book, Should Christians Support Israel? I have a chapter in there. So my initial inclination was, well, I think Paul is telling people Judaism is cut off. It's no longer God's plan. I went back and reread the writings of the Apostle Paul every time where he deals with the nation of Israel. And what became clear to me is that the passages in Romans chapter 10, Romans chapter 11, seem to be definitive in the theology of the Apostle Paul, where he says that God is the root and that this tree has grown up and that tree is Israel and that Christians are grafted into that tree. So it's not that the tree has been cut down. There are plenty of examples, even in the parables of Jesus, where a tree that didn't bear good fruit got cut down and thrown into the fire. But this tree is the root of a Judeo worldview into which Christians have been grafted. And I think my personal view is this. I wish Christians would spend less time trying to figure out whether today's Jews are grafted out and more time being amazed at the fact that we are grafted in. Because that is a miracle of history, that God would have this people, and then many of them would end up rejecting him, but that their entire faith would then be universalized as a result. So I'm, in my use of images as well as the other arguments, we could go into a lot more detail. I'm not showing you those pictures to make you feel sorry for any people who are there. I'm just simply pointing out that we've always in this country dealt with Israel as a geopolitical issue. We need to be thinking about it as a theopolitical issue. There is a radical worldview, that of jihadism, or what we would call Islamism, that is attempting to destroy not only Israel, but ultimately the United States. So when I go there, I go into the Palestinian areas and I talk to people. 95% of Palestinians say they support Hamas. Even in the United States, by the way, Jordan is the only other nation than Israel that has ever offered Palestinian citizenship. Are you aware of that? It's kind of a fascinating realization. And today, Jordan does not offer new Palestinian citizenship, only Israel does, of all of the nations in the Middle East. You can find Palestinian citizens in the United States of America. I spend time with them. And they tell me, I ask, what do you think about Mahmoud Abbas, who is the leader of the Palestinians in the West Bank area? He says, oh, Mahmoud Abbas is trash. But Yahya Sinwar, very smart man. Yahya Sinwar is the man who planned the October 7th terrorist attacks. Like, this guy in the United States of America is full on supportive of Hamas. So when you look at all of those factors, I think the case comes together that we can't avoid recognizing that there are people who want to see the United States of America ultimately destroyed. So the people I meet in Palestine, I ask them, is Israel the little Satan? Oh yes, Israel's the little Satan. I ask them, who's the big Satan? Guess what the answer is? The United States of America. 100% of them say the United States of America is the big Satan. So we are the ultimate target. Some of our future rises or falls on support of this tiny little nation in a completely other part of the world. Okay, time for one more question, I think, or maybe two. Let's go back over here.
Thank you for your time. Do you have any imperatives for us as students in helping Israel? Is there any academic work, writing, or research that you would like to see done?
Yes. One of the most, This is going to set off a debate. So for all of my life, I was in universities that were almost wholly given over to a postmodern perspective. I had to fight against it every single day of my academic career, bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD. Emerging during that time was a theory of what's called settler colonialism. Settler colonialism. Why did it come about? When you look back at the people who initially began to write about settler colonialism, you realize that they were trying to make the United States government be illegitimate so that it could be overthrown, so that they could take control. But the way, at one of my universities, every time they had a public presentation, they had a land acknowledgement first. You familiar with that? Our building is built on land that was once owned by, and they named the different tribes that had once owned the land. They had absolutely no intention of giving the land back. In fact, it was almost like gloating. We're going to go ahead and mention the people who used to own this place because we have it now. We won. Thank you very much. It's just important for us to understand as we have a public meeting. There is so much hypocrisy inside that settler colonialist movement, and there are very few people who have articulated a reasoned case against it. Now, part of the reason people haven't articulated a reasoned case against it is because, there's really, it's what people say is, the United States of America is illegitimate because it impinged on the rights of indigenous people. And my question is, can you name a single nation in the world where the people are indigenous? Like literally, there is no nation in the world. At some point in time, those people came to that land. They took it over from whoever else was there. But because it seems like such a crazy thing, no one's actually developed a reasoned argument against it. In the same way that people say, there are 68 different genders, not just male or female. And most people are like, are you crazy? And we paid $100,000 a year for you to go to college and learn this? And so people don't even take it seriously, but there's a groundswell of a movement where the vast majority of people in academia believe these things, and there's not been a solid counterpoint to it. And I'm mentioning this because there's a woke right as much as there is a woke left in the United States of America, and we need to be aware that somewhere in the middle, we need to do more than just shout at each other. All right, this takes us up to 3:59, and 4 o'clock is our finish time. Do you have a question you can ask in 10 seconds and I can answer in 20? Okay, go for it.
So you mentioned something about 25% of our modern medical technology being sourced from Israeli groups.
Yeah.
What are some other, perhaps better reasons, economically or geopolitically, that we should support Israel?
Well, Israel is the technological center of the world. In fact, the Palestinian people do better than any other person in the Middle East. Palestinians have a higher level of income than Muslims in any other part of the Middle East because of their adjacency to all of this technological progress. Their standard of income has gone up significantly. I think those economic reasons are significant. I think beyond that, the fact that, say, 25% of the Jews in the world live in Israel is significant. The reason the surrounding nations want Israel destroyed is because they believe that they can deal the mortal death blow to Judaism that they think was unfinished from World War II, from Adolf Hitler. And I think there is a righteous cause for us standing up for people whose very way of life is threatened by that. But it is almost literally the case that without Judaism today, we would not have the technological and scientific advancements that have made life possible and beneficial for people in the United States, not only, but also around the world. I don't know if you're aware of this, but half the world now lives at an income level that is middle class or higher. This has never happened in all the history of humanity. And when you look back at how it happened, you see Protestant Christians and Jews of various kinds who have made those innovations possible. Thank you all very much for your time.